The wind screamed like a wounded animal across the frozen plains of New Mexico, and Xander Garrett had seen 3 men freeze to death in weather like this. So when he spotted the figure stumbling through the whiteout toward his ranch, he knew he had maybe 5 minutes before death claimed another victim. He burst through the door of his small ranch house, grabbed every blanket he owned, and ran into the blizzard without bothering to button his coat. The figure collapsed 20 feet from his porch, a heap of tattered fabric and desperation half buried in the mounting snow. Xander reached down and pulled the person up, shocked to find a woman's face staring back at him, her lips already turning blue, ice crystals forming on her eyelashes. "I have you," he said, though he doubted she could hear him over the wind's rage. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them, and laid her on the floor near the fireplace. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cold as marble. He had seen this before, too, the way hypothermia could steal a person away even after they seemed safe. His hands moved quickly, removing her frozen outer garments, wrapping her in dry blankets, building up the fire until it roared with heat. She did not wake for hours. Xander stayed beside her the entire time, monitoring her breathing, occasionally checking her pulse at her wrist. The blizzard continued its assault outside, rattling the windows, piling snow against the walls. He was grateful he had stocked up on firewood and supplies just last week, grateful his small ranch was sturdy enough to withstand the storm's fury. When her eyes finally opened, they were the color of forget-me-nots, startling and clear despite her ordeal. She stared at him with confusion and fear, trying to sit up too quickly. "Easy," Xander said, his voice gentle. "You nearly froze to death out there." She looked around the small but tidy room, taking in the stone fireplace, the simple furniture, the cooking area in the corner. Her gaze returned to him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "I have nothing," she whispered, her voice raw. "I lost everything in the storm. My wagon overturned, my horse ran off. I walked for hours trying to find shelter." Xander studied her face. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair that was still damp from melted snow. Despite the exhaustion etched into her features, he could see strength there too, the kind that came from surviving more than just a blizzard. "What is your name?" he asked. "Fiona," she said. "Fiona Brooks. I am Xander Garrett. This is my ranch about 15 miles outside of Socorro." He stood and walked to his kitchen area, ladling hot soup from the pot he kept simmering on the stove. "Right now, you need to eat and rest. Everything else can wait." She took the bowl with trembling hands, and he noticed how thin her fingers were, how her dress, now hanging by the fire to dry, was patched in multiple places. Whatever story had brought her to New Mexico territory in the middle of winter, it was not one of prosperity. As she ate, color slowly returned to her cheeks. The storm continued outside, and Xander knew they would be trapped together for at least a day, maybe more. He made himself busy preparing a second bowl of soup, checking the fire, doing anything to give her space to recover her composure. "You saved my life," Fiona said finally. "Anyone would have done the same." "That is not true." She set down the empty bowl. "I have learned that the hard way." There was a story in those words, but Xander did not press. Instead, he said, "The storm should break by tomorrow evening. Until then, you are safe here." She nodded, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. "I do not know how I will repay you. I meant what I said. I have nothing. No money, no possessions, nothing." Xander met her eyes across the small room. In the firelight, she looked both vulnerable and defiant, like someone who had been knocked down but refused to stay there. Something in his chest tightened, a feeling he had not experienced in the 3 years since he had settled on this isolated piece of land. "Everything I have is yours," he said simply. You do not owe me anything." Fiona stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "You do not mean that." "I do." He gestured around the modest room. "It is not much, but you are welcome to whatever you need." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that this moment would change both their lives in ways neither could yet understand. The blizzard raged for 2 full days. During that time, Xander learned pieces of Fiona's story. She had come west from Missouri with her father, hoping to start fresh after her mother's death. Her father had died of fever just outside of Santa Fe, leaving her alone with a wagon, a horse, and a few supplies. She had been trying to reach Socorro, where she had heard there might be work, when the storm caught her unprepared. "I should have known better," she said on the second evening, sitting near the fire while Xander prepared their dinner. "The locals in Santa Fe warned me that a storm was coming. But I thought I had time, thought I could outrun it." "You survived," Xander said. "That takes more than luck." She smiled faintly. "Or stubbornness." That too. He had learned other things about her in their forced proximity. She was educated, able to read and write, with a quick mind that absorbed information. She had a dry sense of humor that emerged once she felt safe. And she insisted on helping with whatever tasks she could manage, despite still being weak from her ordeal. Xander found himself drawn to her in ways that surprised him. He had chosen this isolated life deliberately after his own losses, after the war had taken his brother and a failed engagement had left him questioning everything. He had wanted solitude, distance from the complications of human connection. But Fiona's presence in his small home did not feel like an intrusion. It felt like something he had been missing without knowing it. On the third morning, the blizzard finally broke. Xander opened the door to find the world transformed into a landscape of white, the sun reflecting off the snow so brightly it hurt to look at directly. The temperature had risen just enough to make travel possible, though still bitterly cold. "I should try to reach Socorro," Fiona said, standing beside him in the doorway. She wore her dress, now clean and mended where Xander had noticed tears. "There must be work there, some way for me to support myself." "In this weather, the trip would take most of a day," Xander said carefully. "And Socorro is a rough town, not many opportunities for a woman alone." She turned to face him. "Then what do you suggest? I cannot stay here indefinitely living off your charity." "It would not be charity." The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he knew they were right. "I could use help on the ranch. I have been managing alone, but it is hard work for one person. If you stayed, you could earn your keep. I would pay you fair wages." Fiona's eyes searched his face. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He held her gaze. "I know you are strong, resourceful, and not afraid of hard work. I know you need a place to stay, and I need help. It seems like a practical arrangement." She was quiet for a long time, and he could see her weighing options she did not really have. "For how long?" she asked finally. "As long as you want. Through the winter at least. Come spring, if you want to move on, I will take you to Socorro myself and help you find proper work." "And the sleeping arrangements?" Her cheeks colored slightly. "I am grateful for everything you have done, but I need to know what you expect." "I expect nothing beyond honest work," Xander said firmly. "I will build a partition in the cabin to give you privacy. Or I can sleep in the barn once the weather warms a bit more, whatever makes you comfortable." Relief and something else, something harder to name, crossed her face. "Then I accept. And thank you, Xander, for everything." They shook hands on it, a formal gesture that felt both too little and too much for what was actually happening between them. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Xander built a partition using spare lumber, creating a small private space for Fiona on one side of the cabin. She proved to be everything he had hoped and more, learning quickly how to care for the small herd of cattle he maintained, how to mend fences and repair equipment, how to cook the simple meals they shared. She had a way with the animals, a patience and gentleness that made even his most stubborn cow settle under her touch. They talked during the long evenings, sharing stories of their pasts. Xander told her about growing up in Texas, about following his brother into the war and being one of the few in his regiment to come back. He spoke of his brief engagement to a woman who had ultimately chosen someone with better prospects, and how the rejection had stung less than he expected, making him realize he had been following a path others had laid out rather than choosing his own. Fiona shared her own griefs and hopes. Her mother had been a teacher back in Missouri and had taught Fiona everything she knew. Her father had been a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, and that restlessness had ultimately led them west. She spoke of him with a mixture of love and exasperation, missing him terribly while also wishing he had been more practical. "I used to resent his dreams," she admitted one night. "But I think I inherited some of that restlessness. I want more than what was available to me back home. I want a life that feels like mine." "I understand that," Xander said. "That is why I came here too, to build something that belongs to me alone." As January gave way to February, the bitter cold eased slightly, though snow still blanketed the ground. Xander found himself looking forward to the end of each day, when he and Fiona would sit by the fire and talk. He noticed small things about her: the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, the soft humming she did while working, the fierce determination that flashed in her eyes when she mastered a new skill. He tried not to think too much about how natural it felt to have her there, how empty the cabin would seem if she left. This was a temporary arrangement, he reminded himself. Come spring, she would want to move on, find her own path. He should not let himself get attached. But his heart, it seemed, had other ideas. The trouble started on a frigid morning in late February when riders appeared on the horizon. Xander was mending a fence while Fiona worked in the barn, and he straightened when he saw them coming. 4 men on horseback moving with purpose. He recognized the lead rider immediately, Clayton Morrison, who owned the largest ranch in the area. Morrison was a hard man who believed his wealth entitled him to whatever he wanted. The 3 men with him were ranch hands, the kind who followed orders without question. "Garrett," Morrison said, reining in his horse. He was a thick man in his 50s with a gray beard and cold eyes. "Heard you have a woman staying here." "News travels fast," Xander said carefully, his hand drifting toward the rifle he kept nearby. In a territory this sparse, everything travels fast. Morrison's gaze moved past him toward the cabin. "I am looking to hire help. Could use someone who knows their way around a kitchen and can clean. I will pay good wages. Miss Brooks already has employment. Let the woman speak for herself." Morrison dismounted, his men following suit. "Miss Brooks," he called out, "I have a business proposition for you." Fiona emerged from the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. Xander saw her take in the scene, the 4 men against one, the tension in his shoulders. Her chin lifted slightly as she walked over. "I am Fiona Brooks," she said. "Clayton Morrison. I own the Morrison Ranch about 10 miles northeast of here. I am prepared to offer you steady work and fair pay, better than scratching out an existence on this marginal piece of land." "I am content where I am," Fiona said evenly. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You have not heard my offer yet. $20 a month, room and board, respectable work." "That is generous," Fiona said, "but my answer is still no. I am satisfied with my current arrangement." "You are making a mistake," Morrison said, his tone hardening. Garrett here is barely keeping his head above water. Come spring, he will probably have to sell out. Then where will you be?" "That is my concern, not yours," Fiona replied. Xander stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Fiona and Morrison. "The lady has given you her answer. I think it is time you left." For a moment, Morrison's face darkened with anger. Then he smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You are playing a dangerous game, Garrett. This territory is not kind to those who make enemies." "I am not looking for enemies," Xander said quietly, "but I am not looking to be pushed around either." Morrison mounted his horse with deliberate slowness. "You will both regret this," he said, then spurred his horse forward, his men following. They watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Fiona let out a breath she had been holding. "Will he cause trouble?" she asked. "Probably." Xander picked up his rifle, checking it automatically. "Morrison is used to getting what he wants. He does not like being told no." "I am sorry if I have made things difficult for you." "You did not." He met her eyes. "You made your own choice and I respect that, but I want you to know if you had wanted to take his offer, I would have understood." "I did not want it." She said it fiercely, surprising them both with her vehemence. "I feel safe here. I trust you. I would not trade that for any amount of money." Something in Xander's chest expanded at her words. He wanted to tell her that he felt the same, that somewhere in the past month she had become essential to him, that the thought of her leaving left him hollow. But he held back, uncertain if she would welcome such declarations. "We should stay alert," he said instead. "Morrison is not the type to let things go." He was right to be cautious. Over the next week, small acts of sabotage began. A fence was cut, letting 2 of his cattle wander off. It took Xander and Fiona a full day to track them down. Then his water trough was damaged, requiring hours of repair. Finally, someone took a shot at him while he was out riding his property line. The bullet missed, but the message was clear. "This cannot continue," Fiona said that evening, her face pale with worry. "Someone could get hurt." "Morrison is trying to pressure us," Xander said. "He thinks if he makes things difficult enough, we will give in." "Maybe I should leave. Go to Sakura like I originally planned. If I am not here, he has no reason to continue." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Xander intended. "You are not leaving because some bully is trying to intimidate us. Besides, I do not think he would stop even if you left. This has become about more than just hiring you. It is about him proving he has power." "Then what do we do?" Xander was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We go to the sheriff in Sakura, file a formal complaint. Morrison operates with impunity because no one challenges him, but there are laws even out here. Will the sheriff help? Only one way to find out." They rode to Sakura the next morning, a journey that took most of the day. The town was exactly as rough as Xander had described, a collection of wooden buildings along a dusty main street, saloons and supply stores competing for space. The sheriff's office was a small structure near the center of town. Sheriff Tom Whitaker was a weathered man in his 60s who listened to their story with a skeptical expression. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I am not saying I do not believe you," he said, "but Morrison is a powerful man around here. He employs a lot of people, brings money into the town. You are asking me to accuse him of crimes based on suspicion." "Someone shot at me," Xander said. "That is more than suspicion. Did you see who fired the shot?" "No, but then it is your word against whoever Morrison might have hired. And even if I wanted to pursue this, which I am not saying I do not have the resources. I am one man covering a territory that spans hundreds of miles." Fiona leaned forward. "So you are saying there is nothing that can be done? That Morrison can do whatever he wants because he has money and power?" Whitaker had the grace to look uncomfortable. I am saying that frontier justice is complicated. My advice: make peace with Morrison if you can. Find some compromise. The only compromise he will accept is us doing exactly what he wants, Xander said bitterly. Thank you for your time, Sheriff. They left the office and stood on the wooden sidewalk, both discouraged. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. We should find a place to stay for the night, Xander said. It is too late to ride back now. They found a modest boarding house run by a Mexican woman named Rosa Martinez, who offered them 2 small but clean rooms. Over dinner in the boarding house's dining area, they sat in discouraged silence. I am sorry the sheriff was not more helpful, Fiona said finally. I expected it, honestly. Men like Morrison usually get away with whatever they want out here. Xander rubbed his face tiredly. But we will figure something out. I am not giving up my land, and I am not letting him intimidate you. Maybe we could talk to Morrison directly, Fiona suggested. Appeal to whatever decency he might have. Men like that do not have decency. They have interests. But an idea was forming in Xander's mind, something risky but potentially effective. Though you might be right about talking to him, just not the way you are thinking. He explained his plan, and Fiona listened with growing alarm and reluctant admiration. It was bold, possibly foolish, but it might be their only option. The next morning they rode to the Morrison Ranch. It was an impressive spread, with a large main house, multiple barns, and extensive corrals. Workers moved about with purpose, and Xander counted at least a dozen men within sight. A foreman met them before they reached the main house. State your business. We are here to see Morrison, Xander said. Tell him Xander Garrett and Fiona Brooks want to talk terms. The foreman disappeared into the house, returning a few minutes later with Morrison himself. The older man looked surprised but pleased to see them. Come to your senses, he asked. Come to talk, Xander said. In private. Morrison led them into his house, a sprawling structure furnished with expensive items clearly shipped from back east. He offered them seats in a study lined with books Xander suspected were more for show than reading. I will be direct, Xander said once they were settled. Your harassment needs to stop. The fence cutting, the damaged equipment, the shooting. All of it. Morrison spread his hands innocently. I do not know what you are talking about. Of course you do not. But here is what I know. You want Miss Brooks to work for you, though I suspect your interests are not entirely professional. And you want me to fail so you can buy up my land cheap and expand your holdings. You have quite an imagination. Maybe. But here is my proposition. Leave us alone, and I will consider selling you grazing rights to part of my land. Not the land itself, just rights to run some of your cattle there during summer months. It would give you the expansion you want without forcing me out. Morrison leaned back, considering. And Miss Brooks? Miss Brooks makes her own decisions about her employment, but if you stop the harassment, she might be willing to consider occasional work. Cooking for your men during roundup season, perhaps. Something temporary and well compensated. Fiona shot Xander a look, but did not contradict him. She understood what he was doing, offering Morrison a way to save face while getting most of what he wanted. You are in a weak position to be negotiating, Morrison said. Am I? Xander kept his voice steady. Because it seems to me that if anything happens to either of us now, after we have visited the sheriff and come here directly, you would be the obvious suspect. Even a reluctant sheriff would have to investigate. That would be bad for business, bad for your reputation. Better to accept a compromise that gives you something rather than risk losing everything. Silence stretched between them. Morrison's face was unreadable, and Xander felt his heart pounding. This gamble could backfire spectacularly. Finally, Morrison nodded slowly. Grazing rights for the north section of your property, April through September, and Miss Brooks cooks for my men during spring roundup. 2 weeks of work, $50. 75, Fiona said calmly. And only if I have my own quarters, separate from the men. Morrison's eyebrows rose, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. Agreed, but the harassment you claim has been happening. That stops only if you honor this deal. Any breach on your part and all agreements are void. Understood, Xander said. They shook hands on it, and Xander felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders. It was not a perfect solution, but it was better than an ongoing conflict they could not win. As they rode back toward Xander's ranch, Fiona was quiet. Finally, she said, you should have asked me before offering my labor. You are right, I apologize. If you do not want to honor that part of the agreement, I will find another way. No, it is fine. You were right to do it. Morrison needed to feel like he won something, and 2 weeks of cooking is a small price for peace. She paused. But Xander, next time please talk to me first. I will, I promise. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the March sun warm on their faces. Spring was coming to New Mexico, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. Can I ask you something? Fiona said as they approached the ranch. Anything. Why did you really invite me to stay? That first day after the blizzard, you did not need help. You had been managing fine alone. Xander considered his answer carefully. They had reached the edge of his property, and he reined in his horse, turning to face her. Honestly, I saw someone who needed help and I helped. That was all it was at first. But then you stayed, and I realized how lonely I had been without knowing it. How much I had cut myself off from everything meaningful. You reminded me that isolation is not the same as peace. Fiona's eyes were very blue in the afternoon light. I feel the same way. Before the blizzard, I thought I needed to prove I could make it entirely on my own, that accepting help was weakness. But you showed me that strength and vulnerability are not opposites. That sometimes the bravest thing is letting someone stand beside you. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for months. Xander wanted to close the distance between their horses, to reach for her hand, to tell her everything he had been holding back. But uncertainty held him frozen. It was Fiona who moved first, guiding her horse closer until their legs nearly touched. I am not temporary, Xander. I do not want to leave come spring or any other season. I want to stay, with you, if that is what you want too. It is all I want, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been afraid to say it, afraid you would feel obligated because of everything that has happened. I do not feel obligated. I feel home. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, and the touch sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the spring sun. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, looking at each other with new understanding. When they finally reached the cabin, they tended to the horses together. Their movements synchronized from months of working side by side. Inside, Xander built up the fire while Fiona prepared their evening meal. It was all familiar, domestic, but now charged with new meaning. That night, after they had eaten and were sitting by the fire, Xander said, I want to court you properly. I know we have been living in close quarters and none of this has been conventional, but I want to do this right. Fiona smiled. I would like that, though I think we might be doing things backward, considering I already know you snore and you have seen me at my absolute worst. I do not snore. You definitely do, but I have gotten used to it. They both laughed, and it felt good, natural. Over the following weeks, Xander courted Fiona with a care and attention that made her blush. He picked wildflowers for her when they started blooming in April. He surprised her with small gifts, a new hair ribbon from Sakura, a book of poetry he special ordered from Santa Fe. They took evening walks along the property, talking about their hopes and dreams, making plans for the ranch's future. When spring roundup came and Fiona had to honor her commitment to cook for Morrison's men, Xander rode with her to the Morrison ranch and made sure her quarters were acceptable. He visited every few days, officially to discuss the grazing rights, but really to check on her. The work was hard and the hours long, but Fiona handled it with her usual competence. Morrison's men treated her with respect, perhaps because Morrison had made it clear that any disrespect would result in immediate dismissal. When she returned after 2 weeks, Xander was waiting at the ranch, and the way his face lit up when he saw her made Fiona's heart sing. She was exhausted, ready for a bath and rest, but being back felt like coming home in a way nowhere else ever had. "I missed you," Xander said, helping her down from her horse. "I missed you too, your coffee especially. Just my coffee and maybe you a little bit." He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, and she responded with enthusiasm, her arms going around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I want to marry you," Xander said. "I know it has only been a few months and maybe that is too soon, but I am certain. I love you, Fiona. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just a temporary arrangement." "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too. I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to say it." They married in Socorro a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church there. Rosa Martinez from the boarding house stood as witness, along with Sheriff Whitaker, who seemed pleased that the situation with Morrison had resolved peacefully. Even Morrison himself attended, giving Fiona a respectful nod that might have been his version of a blessing. The wedding was modest but meaningful, and when Xander and Fiona exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges the frontier might bring, there were tears in both their eyes. Their wedding night was tender and nervous and wonderful, two people learning each other in new ways, building intimacy that went beyond the emotional connection they had already forged. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Fiona traced patterns on Xander's chest. "When I was walking through that blizzard," she said softly, "I thought I was going to die. I was so cold and lost and certain I would never see another sunrise. And then you appeared like something out of a dream. You saved me in so many ways, Xander. Not just from freezing, but from giving up on everything." "You saved me too," he said, kissing her forehead. "I did not realize how much I had closed myself off until you forced your way into my life. You reminded me that taking risks on people is worth it, that love is worth it." "Everything I have is yours," she whispered, echoing his words from that first night. "Just like you told me, it works both ways now." "Everything I have is yours," he agreed. "Always." The first year of their marriage was not easy. Ranching rarely was, especially on a small operation with limited resources. But they worked together, building up the herd gradually, improving the property, making the cabin more comfortable. Xander built an addition, giving them a proper bedroom and more space. Fiona started a garden, growing vegetables that added variety to their diet and extras they could sell in Socorro. They made friends among the other ranchers in the area, finding a community that had been invisible when they were isolated. They attended church socials and town gatherings, gradually building a network of support. Morrison left them alone, honoring their agreement, and eventually became something close to a friend, respecting the way they had stood up to him. In the spring of 1886, exactly 2 years after Fiona had stumbled through that blizzard, she told Xander she was pregnant. He whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "Careful," she protested. "I am carrying precious cargo." "The most precious," he agreed, setting her down gently. "Are you happy? Happier than I ever imagined possible, she said honestly. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I found you, that we built this together. The pregnancy was difficult at times. Fiona suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester, and the summer heat made her miserable. But Xander was attentive and patient, taking over more of the physical work, making sure she rested when needed. Their son was born in November during a cold snap that reminded them both of the blizzard that had brought them together. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Rosa Martinez, who had experience as a midwife. Xander paced outside the bedroom partition for hours, every cry from Fiona tearing at his heart. But when Rosa finally emerged carrying a small, squalling bundle, and told him both mother and baby were healthy, Xander felt tears of relief and joy streaming down his face. "You have a son," Rosa said, placing the baby in his arms. "Congratulations." Xander looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt his heart expand to make room for this new love. He carried the baby to Fiona, who was exhausted but radiant. "Look what we made," she said softly, touching the baby's small hand. "He is perfect. You are perfect." Xander kissed her gently. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months but had not settled on anything. Now, looking at their son, Fiona said, "Thomas, after my father. And James for a middle name after your brother." "Thomas James Garrett," Xander said, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Tommy." Their son was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both exhausted but happy. Xander discovered reserves of patience he did not know he possessed, walking the floor with Tommy during fussy nights, changing diapers with fumbling but determined hands, staring at his son with an awe that never quite faded. Fiona bloomed in motherhood, fierce and loving in equal measure. She nursed their son while singing soft lullabies her own mother had sung to her, creating connections across generations. She worried constantly those first few months, checking on Tommy multiple times each night to make sure he was breathing, but gradually relaxed as he grew stronger and more alert. The seasons turned. Tommy learned to crawl, then walk, then run. He followed his father everywhere, a small shadow with Xander's dark hair and Fiona's blue eyes. They added a daughter 2 years later, Sarah Margaret, who had her father's green eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Xander expanded the herd carefully, never overextending, building a reputation for quality cattle. Fiona's garden grew larger each year, and she started selling preserves and pickles in Socorro that became popular enough that the general store ordered them regularly. When Morrison died in 1889, he left a surprising provision in his will. The grazing rights agreement was made permanent and transferred as a gift to the Garrett family, along with a small piece of land adjacent to their property. The letter that accompanied the bequest said simply, "In recognition of 2 people who had the courage to stand up to me when few others did, build something good." It was as close to an apology as Morrison could manage, and Xander and Fiona accepted it in the spirit it was intended, using the extra land to expand their operation and provide more security for their growing family. Their third child, a son they named Michael, was born in 1890. By then, the cabin had been expanded multiple times and bore little resemblance to the small, simple structure where Fiona had first woken after the blizzard. It was a real house now, with multiple bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and even a small parlor where Fiona taught the children their letters and numbers. Life was not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, moments when money was tight and the future uncertain. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through the difficult times and celebrating the good ones. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took Fiona on a picnic to the spot where she had collapsed in the blizzard all those years ago. It was a beautiful spring day, wildflowers blooming everywhere, the sky an endless blue. "You ever regret it?" he asked as they sat together on a blanket, watching their children play nearby. "Staying here, marrying me, choosing this life," Fiona looked at him with surprise. "Never. Not for a single moment, do you?" "No. But sometimes I wonder if you ever think about what your life might have been like if you had made it to Socorro that day, if you had never stumbled onto my ranch." "I think about it," she admitted, "but not with regret. With gratitude that fate or luck or divine providence sent me to your door instead. You kept your word, Xander. Everything you had became mine, and everything I had became yours. We built this life together, equal partners. That is more than most people ever find." He took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "When I said those words that first night, I meant them practically. I had no idea I was making a promise that would shape the rest of my life. The best promises are the ones we do not fully understand when we make them," Fiona said. "The ones we grow into rather than out of." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children. Tommy was 9 now, tall for his age and already showing signs of becoming the serious, responsible young man he would grow into. Sarah was 7, adventurous and fearless, constantly giving her parents heart attacks with her climbing and exploring. Michael, at just 2 years old, was still toddling around, investigating everything with intense curiosity. "I want them to know their story," Fiona said suddenly, "when they are older. I want them to understand that love does not always arrive in conventional ways, but that does not make it less real or valuable." "We will tell them," Xander promised. "About the blizzard, about your courage in surviving it, about how you changed everything for me." As the sun began to set, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of gold and crimson, they packed up their picnic and gathered their children. The walk back to the ranch house was filled with the chatter of young voices and laughter, the sounds of a family secure in their love for each other. That night, after the children were in bed, Xander and Fiona stood on their porch looking out at the land they had built their life on. The stars were brilliant overhead, uncountable and eternal. "Tell me again," Fiona said softly. "The words you said that first night." Xander pulled her close, his arms around her waist, her back against his chest. "Everything I have is yours," he murmured into her hair. "Everything I am is yours. Today, tomorrow, always." "And everything I have is yours," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "My heart, my love, my life. All of it, forever." They kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from that desperate beginning. The wind that had once screamed with killing cold now whispered gently across the plains, carrying the scent of sage and promise. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch they had built together stood solid and prosperous. And between them flowed the love that had sustained them through every challenge, every hardship, every moment of doubt. Fiona had arrived during a blizzard with nothing, and Xander had offered her everything. In the years since, they had made good on that exchange in ways neither could have imagined, creating not just a home but a legacy, not just a marriage but a partnership that would endure for all their days. The years continued to unfold with their own rhythms and challenges. Tommy grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the ranch and showed a natural talent for working with cattle. Sarah became an accomplished rider who could outwork most of the occasional hired hands they brought on during busy seasons. Michael developed a keen mind for numbers, and kept track of the ranch's accounts with a precision that made Fiona laugh, seeing her own practical nature reflected in their youngest son. In 1895, when Fiona was pregnant with their fourth child, a summer drought hit New Mexico hard. The grazing lands turned brown and brittle, and water became scarce. Xander made the difficult decision to sell off part of their herd rather than watch the cattle starve, taking a financial loss but preserving the core of what they had built. "We will recover," Fiona told him one evening when he sat with the account books, his face lined with worry. "We always do, I know. But I wanted to give you and the children more security than this. Some years it feels like we are always one disaster away from losing everything." She set down her sewing and moved to stand behind him, her hands on his shoulders despite her advanced pregnancy making the movement awkward. "You have given us everything that matters. Love, stability, a home. The rest is just details." Their fourth child, another daughter they named Anna Rose, was born that September. She came into the world during a rainstorm that broke the drought, and Fiona declared it a sign of good fortune. True to the prediction, the following years brought better weather and prosperity. As the new century approached, the West was changing. The truly wild days were fading into history, replaced by more established communities and modern conveniences. A railroad line was extended closer to Socorro, making it easier to transport cattle and goods. Telegraph lines connected the territory to the rest of the nation. The Apache Wars that had shaped so much of New Mexico's history were long over, and the territory was moving toward eventual statehood. Through it all, the Garrett family adapted and thrived. Xander served on the local Cattlemen's Association, helping to establish fair practices and mutual support among ranchers. Fiona became known for her charitable work, organizing aid for families hit by hardship and teaching reading to children whose parents could not afford formal schooling. Their home became a gathering place for the community. Fiona's cooking was legendary, and Xander's quiet wisdom made him someone people sought out for advice. They hosted barn dances and holiday celebrations, creating traditions that their children would remember and pass on to their own families. In 1899, Tommy announced his intention to marry Maria Sanchez, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The wedding was a grand affair that brought together the Mexican and Anglo communities in a celebration that lasted 3 days. Watching his eldest son exchange vows, Xander felt the strange sensation of time folding back on itself, remembering his own wedding day and the hopes he had carried into marriage. "They will be happy," Fiona whispered beside him, reading his thoughts as she so often did. "I hope so. I hope they find even a fraction of what we have. They will find their own path, just like we did." Sarah surprised everyone by declaring she wanted to attend normal school in Santa Fe to become a teacher, following in the tradition of her grandmother she had never met. It was unusual for young women from ranching families, but Xander and Fiona had always encouraged their children to pursue their passions. They arranged for her to stay with a respectable family in Santa Fe and visited as often as they could manage. Michael, at 15, was already talking about studying law, wanting to help shape the territory's transition to statehood. Anna Rose, the youngest at 10, was still finding her way but showed artistic talent, sketching everything around her with careful attention to detail. On New Year's Eve 1900, as the world celebrated the turn of the century, the Garrett family gathered at the ranch house. Tommy and Maria were there with their infant daughter, making Xander and Fiona grandparents. Sarah was home from school for the holidays. Michael and Anna Rose were caught up in the excitement of a new century, full of questions about what the future might hold. As midnight approached, Xander stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, and the room fell quiet. 18 years ago, a blizzard brought a woman to my door who had nothing. I told her everything I had was hers. At the time, I had very little to offer. A small cabin, a struggling ranch, a lonely life. But she saw past all that to the possibilities. Together, we built something far greater than I could have imagined. We built a family, a legacy, a life filled with love. Fiona's eyes were shining with tears. And you kept your promise. Every day, in every way, you have shared everything with me. Your strength, your kindness, your unwavering support. I arrived with nothing and found everything. Tommy stood, lifting his own glass. To my parents who taught us what real love looks like. Not the easy kind that exists only in good times, but the kind that weathers storms and emerges stronger. To family, Maria added, cradling their daughter. To the future, Sarah said. To courage, Michael contributed. To home. Anna Rose finished. They clinked glasses and drank, and as the clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of a new century, the family embraced. Outside, the New Mexico night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead just as they had on that long-ago night when Fiona had stumbled through a blizzard toward an uncertain fate. The new century brought changes they could not have predicted. New Mexico became a state in 1912, and Michael, who had indeed become a lawyer, played a small role in drafting the state constitution. Sarah married a fellow teacher and opened a school in a small community that desperately needed one. Anna Rose's artwork gained recognition, and she eventually had pieces displayed in galleries as far away as Denver and San Francisco. Tommy took over more of the ranch operations as Xander aged, showing the same steady competence his father had displayed. He and Maria had 4 children, expanding the Garrett family into a new generation. The ranch house was expanded yet again to accommodate family gatherings that grew larger with each passing year. Xander and Fiona aged gracefully together, their hair turning gray, their movements slower but their bond as strong as ever. They took walks each evening when weather permitted, hands clasped, often in comfortable silence that required no words. They sat together on the porch watching sunsets, counting grandchildren, marveling at how their life had unfolded. In the spring of 1920, Xander fell ill with pneumonia. The doctors from Socorro did what they could, but at 70 years old, his body had less resilience than it once did. Fiona rarely left his bedside, holding his hand, reminding him of their years together. "I am not ready to let you go," she whispered one night when the fever was high and his breathing labored. "I am not going anywhere yet," he managed, squeezing her hand weakly. "Still too much to see. Want to watch our grandchildren grow up." He recovered, though it took months before he regained his strength fully. The illness left him frailer, and both he and Fiona understood that their time together, while precious, was entering its final chapter. They made the most of it. They took a trip to Santa Fe, something they had talked about for years but never done. They renewed their wedding vows on their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren. They told stories of the old days to anyone who would listen, preserving the history of their life together. Fiona was the one who noticed Xander's memory starting to slip in 1924. Small things at first, forgetting where he had left his hat, struggling to remember the name of a grandchild. It progressed slowly but steadily, and eventually, there were days when he did not recognize the ranch, thought he was back in Texas during his youth. But even on the worst days, he knew Fiona. Her face, her voice, her touch remained constant touchstones that anchored him when everything else became confusion. "Tell me the story," he would say, and she knew which one he meant. "You found me in a blizzard," she would begin, settling beside him, taking his aged hand in hers. I had nothing and you gave me everything. You said those words that first night and you spent the rest of your life proving them true. Everything I have is yours, he would murmur, the words automatic even when other memories failed. Everything I have is yours, she would echo. Xander Garrett died peacefully in his sleep in November 1926, 2 days after his 76th birthday, with Fiona beside him as she had been for more than 40 years. The funeral drew people from across the state, a testament to the life he had lived and the impact he had made. Fiona stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and felt the enormity of her loss. They had been partners in the truest sense, building a life together from nothing, facing every challenge side by side. The world without him seemed diminished, colors less bright, sounds less vivid. But she was not alone. Their children and grandchildren surrounded her, the legacy of their love made tangible. Tommy ran the ranch now with the same integrity his father had shown. Sarah's schools had educated hundreds of children. Michael's legal work had helped shape the state's laws toward greater fairness. Anna Rose's art captured the beauty of the land they all loved. Fiona lived another 8 years, remaining sharp and engaged despite her grief. She wrote down the story of how she and Xander had met, how they had built their life together, wanting future generations to understand their family's foundations. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, imparting wisdom and love in equal measure. When she died in her sleep in 1934, at the age of 76, her children found her with a peaceful smile on her face. On her bedside table was a worn piece of paper with Xander's handwriting, a note he had written her years earlier that she had kept always. Everything I have is yours. Everything I am is yours. Today, tomorrow, always. They buried her beside Xander, under the vast New Mexico sky they had both loved. The headstones were simple, but the inscription was meaningful. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. The house where Fiona had first woken after the blizzard was preserved as the heart of the property, even as modern additions surrounded it. Family members would stand in that original room and tell the story to their children, keeping alive the memory of a woman who arrived with nothing and a man who gave her everything. On cold winter nights when the wind howled across the plains, descendants of Xander and Fiona would gather by the fireplace in that original room and remember. They would remember courage and kindness, partnership and perseverance. They would remember that the greatest wealth is not measured in land or cattle or money, but in love freely given and faithfully kept. They would remember a blizzard night in 1884 when two lives intersected in a moment that changed everything. When a dying woman found salvation at a lonely rancher's door. When 6 words, "Everything I have is yours," became the foundation of a love story that would echo through generations. And they would remember that the truest promises are not the ones we make with full knowledge of their weight, but the ones we grow into, day by day, choice by choice, love by love, until they become not just words but the very definition of who we are. The New Mexico wind still blows across those plains, carrying with it the memories of all who have lived and loved there. The land endures, shaped by those who tended it with care. And somewhere in the wind's whisper, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of a promise kept. Everything I have is yours. The Garrett legacy lived on not just in land and property, but in the values Xander and Fiona had instilled in their descendants. Honesty, hard work, compassion for those in need, and the understanding that true wealth came from relationships, not possessions. These principles guided the family through the Great Depression, through wars and changing times, through all the challenges that subsequent generations faced. The ranch house became a landmark in the area, a symbol of endurance and love. Visitors who heard the story of its origins often left with tears in their eyes, moved by the reminder that human kindness could still change lives, that love could still flourish in the harshest conditions. In 2024, exactly 140 years after that fateful blizzard, the descendants of Xander and Fiona Garrett held a reunion at the ranch. Over 200 people attended, spanning 6 generations, all connected by the love of two people who had found each other against all odds. They gathered in the original room, now carefully maintained as a historical space within the larger ranch complex. Someone read aloud from Fiona's written account of that first night, her description of waking to find a stranger offering her everything without expectation of return. A great-great-great-granddaughter, herself named Fiona, stood and said, "We are all here because of a moment of grace, because one man chose kindness when he could have chosen convenience, because one woman chose to trust when she had every reason to be afraid, because two people chose each other every single day for 42 years. That is our inheritance. That is what we carry forward." The wind outside whispered across the plains, constant and eternal, and those gathered felt the presence of their ancestors, the love that had started it all still vibrating through the years like the echo of a bell. A small child, perhaps 5 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve and asked, "What did the cowboy say when the lady came in the snow?" Her mother smiled and knelt down to look into eyes the exact shade of blue that Fiona Brooks had once possessed. "He said, 'Everything I have is yours.'" And he meant it, and because he meant it, all of us are here today. The child considered this seriously. That was nice of him. Yes, her mother agreed. Yes, it was, and you know what? That is how we should all try to live, offering what we have to those who need it. Being generous even when it costs us something. Building love that lasts. As the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in those familiar golds and crimsons, the family gathered outside for a photograph. 200 faces, representing the flowering of a love that had begun in desperation and bloomed into something eternal. The photographer counted down, and just before the shutter clicked, someone called out, "Everything I have is yours." And the entire family responded in unison, voices raised to the darkening sky. "Everything I have is yours." The photograph captured that moment. Multiple generations, different faces and ages and backgrounds, all united by the legacy of two people who had shown what love could build when given the chance to grow. It captured joy and continuity, past and future flowing together in a present moment made possible by choices made 140 years earlier. As the reunion wound down and families began their journeys home, many stopped at the gravesite where Xander and Fiona rested side by side. They left flowers and notes, tokens of gratitude to ancestors they had never met but whose influence shaped their lives still. That night, the ranch house stood quiet under the stars, the same stars that had shone on that desperate night so long ago. Inside, in the original room, a small lamp burned, left on by tradition, a beacon of light and warmth against the darkness, just as Xander's home had been a beacon for Fiona when she stumbled through the blizzard. And if you believe in such things, perhaps two spirits stood on that porch, hands clasped, looking out over the land they had loved and the legacy they had built. Perhaps they smiled at each other, these ghosts of love past, and renewed their eternal promise. "Everything I have is yours. Everything I am is yours, today, tomorrow, always." The wind carried their words across the plains, a benediction and a promise, a reminder that love, true love, never dies. It transforms, it echoes, It grows beyond the individuals who first kindled it, becoming something larger and more enduring than any single lifetime could contain. And somewhere in New Mexico, under that vast, endless sky, their story continues still, whispered by the wind, written in the land, carried forward in the hearts of all who came after. A testament to the power of a simple act of kindness, of 6 words spoken in truth, of a love that refused to be diminished by hardship or time or even death itself. She arrived during a blizzard with nothing. He said, "Everything I have is yours," and from that moment they built forever.